Getting into the blocks for the 100-yard dash.
It feels that way too. It's kind of like keeping my eye on the guy who's going to shoot the gun, get us going.
Or the guys in skating, and there's always the guy with the accent. You go, ready?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, watching some of the things in the Olympics, you know, with the swimmers on the, you know, and a fraction of a second makes the difference in winning. It's incredible. I couldn't believe, you know, some guys won by like 1/10 or less of a second. You know, it's just.
One was like 1/100th of a second. I said, how can you measure that?
I know. It's incredible. Are we good to go, Paul? All right. Okay. I think it's close enough. All right. Turning to 2 Samuel 24. We started into this a little bit last week, and then I revamped the lesson this week. Okay, so I didn't pass any lesson notes out for that last week, and it's probably a good thing because I redid some things and added some things to it. So just to fill it out a little bit and give us a little bit better understanding of what's going on here. And last week, let's just look at verse 1 of chapter 24. It says, "Now again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and it incited David against them to say, 'Go number Israel and Judah.' And then in 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1, it said, 'Then Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel.'" We talked about this last week, you know, the kind of like a discrepancy between these two verses. Okay, but we decided that God, like Job, God permitted David to, or Satan rather, to tempt David to accomplish the purposes that he had in mind. Okay, let's read chapter 24. Let's read verses 1 to 9, and also over in 1 Chronicles, just to kind of get back in the swing of things here. It says, "Now again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and it incited David against them to say, 'Go number Israel and Judah.' The king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, 'Go about now through all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and register the people, that I may know the number of the people. But Joab said to the king, Now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times as many as they are, while the eyes of my lord the king still see. But why does my lord the king delight in this thing? Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the commanders of the army. So Joab and the commanders of the army went out from the presence of the king to register the people of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and camped at Eror on the right side of the city that is in the middle of the valley of Gad and toward Jazer. Then they came to Gilead and to the land of Tahtim Hudshi, and they came to Danjan and around to Sidon, and came to the fortress of Tyre and to all the cities of the Hivites and of the Canaanites, and they went out to the south of Judah, Beersheba. So when they had gone about throughout the whole land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. And Joab gave the number of the registration of the people to the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Then going over to 1 Chronicles, chapter 21, again, starting with verse 1, Then Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. So David said to Joab and to the princes of the people, Go number the Israel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring me word that I may know their number. Joab said, May the Lord add to his people 100 times as many as they are. But my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why does my lord seek this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt to Israel? Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab. Therefore Joab departed and went through all Israel and came to Jerusalem. Joab gave the number of the census of all the people to David, and all Israel were 1,100,000 men who drew the sword, and Judah was 470,000 men who drew the sword. But he did not number Levi and Benjamin among them, for the king's command was abhorrent to Joab. Okay, so was there anything illegal about a national census? No, there really isn't. Excuse me. But they have to be, a census had to be done according to the rules that were laid down in Exodus chapter 30 and in Numbers chapter 3. So let's jump over there to Exodus chapter 30. I kind of marked it for myself so I could get there faster. Okay. So, Exodus 30, verses 11 to 16. Okay, the Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, When you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, then each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord when you number them, so that there will be no plague among them when you number them. This is what everyone who is numbered shall give. Half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. Half a shekel as a contribution to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered from 20 years old and over shall give the contribution to the Lord. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than the half shekel, when you give the contribution to the Lord to make atonement for yourselves. You shall take the atonement money from the sons of Israel, and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may be a memorial for the sons of Israel before the Lord, to make atonement for yourselves. Then going over to Numbers chapter 3, verses 40 to 51. So this kind of gives a little bit, fills out a little bit more from the other chapter, a little more explanation. Then the Lord said to Moses, Number every firstborn male of the sons of Israel. Did you notice the difference from the other one we just read? What the year, it was for, that one started everyone from 20 years up, This is every firstborn, okay? Number every firstborn male of the sons of Israel from a month old and upward, and make a list of their names. You shall take the Levites for me. I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the sons of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the cattle of the sons of Israel. So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the sons of Israel just as the Lord had commanded him. And all the firstborn males by the number of names from a month old and upward, for their numbered men were 22,273. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the sons of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites. And the Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord. For the ransom of the 273 of the firstborn of the sons of Israel, who are in excess beyond the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels apiece per head. You shall take them in terms of the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. And give the money, the ransom, of those who are in excess among them to Aaron and to his sons. So Moses took the ransom money from those who were in excess beyond those ransomed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the sons of Israel he took the money in terms of the shekel of the sanctuary, 1,365. When you multiply it out, that's what you get. Then Moses gave the ransom money to Aaron and to his sons at the command of the Lord, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Interesting passages. And, okay, so I wrote in here in my notes, or in the notes, as to why God was angry at David. In those times, a man only had the right to count or number what belonged to him. Israel did not belong to David. Israel belonged to God. In Exodus 30, verse 12, God told Moses, When you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at the time he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. It was up to God to command a census. And if David counted, he should have only done it at God's command, receiving a ransom to atone for the counting. This is why God was angry again with Israel, and is also why David was conscience-stricken after he counted Israel. David knew it was wrong and begged God to take away the guilt of his sin, as recorded in chapter 24 of 2 Samuel, verse 10. I'll just read that. Now David's heart troubled him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now, O Lord, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly. So how was the half shekel used that was collected from each person?
For worship.
Pardon me?
For worship.
For worship? Okay.
They're given to the Levites.
Or
the Lord's work, or the Lord's.
Okay, it was given to the Levites. Okay, yeah. It was given to the sanctuary, or to the temple, or to the tabernacle, whatever. Okay, as we read in Exodus, we didn't read Exodus 38. Okay, let's look at that for a second. Some of this is going to get a little clearer as we go on here. Exodus 38. Starting in verse 25. Okay. Says, the silver of those of the congregation who were numbered was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. A beka a head, that is half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary, for each one who passed over to those who were numbered, from 20 years old and upward, for 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets of the veil, 100 sockets for the 100 talents, a talent for a socket. Of the 1,775 shekels, He made hooks for the pillars and overlaid their tops and made bands for them. So here in explaining about the tabernacle, when a census was taken, the money was used, and here's an example here, it was used for the construction of the tabernacle, okay? It was to pay for that, all right? Okay, and it talks here, uses the word redeemed. Could a shekel redeem you as an Israelite? Gotcha. How is a person redeemed? Thinking about the law, okay? We're talking about Israel. We're not talking about us, okay? All right? Through the sacrifices, right?
The correct sacrifices.
Yeah, you had to follow the law, the sacrificial system, okay? And initially back here, back there in Exodus, the law is at that time, it hadn't even been given yet, okay? So, but anyway, by giving, what I came across in one commentator's comments was the shekel demonstrated that the people belonged to God. Okay, by giving this to the sanctuary, by giving it to the Levites to construct and maintain the tabernacle, showed, I think the word worship was used, right? Okay, and that they belonged to God, they worshiped God. It was a testimony. Otherwise, okay, so all of us here, perhaps we all support the church here in some way. Why do we do that? Because you have to?
No, we're commanded to. Well, we're commanded to give a percentage, I guess, to the Lord's work.
Okay,
Maintain.
under the law, yes, that was true. In the New Testament, though, it's according to the purpose of your heart.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
But what's the motivation? Just obedience? Okay, all right, to carry on the work, okay, all right. Vern, I see the wheels turning.
It is still a form of worship, isn't it?
Yes, that's kind of what I was getting at. It shows your worship for the Lord. If you don't, does anybody support this church who is not a believer? To my knowledge, no. Why would they support this? It's not what they worship. It's not what's important to them. So we support this because we belong to God, and it's a sign of our worship and our allegiance to God. Same with the Israelites. By giving the shekel to the tabernacle, showed that they were saying, we belong to God. We support what God is doing. Okay? All right.
Isn't it sort of a first fruits?
Yes.
Yeah,
First fruits, yeah.
because we're first fruits of Christ, who is the first fruits.
Yes. And it kind of goes along with what we're talking about here, the firstborn.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to be getting to that a little bit more here. Okay, going back to 2 Samuel. Okay, and this census, this particular census, okay, I said the phrase the people, and it's mentioned in verses 2, 4, 9, and 10, when it talks about the people. Who was David actually taking a census of? Pardon me? Okay, those who are eligible for military service from 20 years of age and up. Okay, it clarifies that when Joab comes back with the numbers. He doesn't say, this is how many million people live in the nation of Israel. He only mentions those who are of age to be in military service. Okay, and so it gets clarification there. So when it refers to the people, it's actually talking about the army, okay, or the military. All right. So he was chastised for not collecting the shekel, for one thing, okay? So what could the purpose of David be rather than to collect taxes or the shekel for the tabernacle? What was his motivation? Verse 9 makes it clear. Yes, to determine the military strength of his army. I mentioned last week that at this time, David actually conquered all the nations that were a threat to Israel around them, okay? And they were subjected. If they weren't defeated, they were at least subjected, okay? And so the nation was at peace, okay? And so, thinking of it naturally, in the flesh, you could say, you need to know what your military strength is so that you can stand against any enemies, potential enemies, okay? All right. Now, there had been military censuses before, and I wrote this in here. There had been military censuses in the past, and the Lord hadn't judged the nation. And they're recorded, and we're not going to go back and read them, in Numbers 1 and 26. Okay? Okay, moving on. If I can turn the page, that would be nice. Okay. All right. So what was it about this census that made it wrong? And I wrote down, or I gave you, there's 5 possible reasons why this was wrong for David to do this. Any ideas on what one or more of the 5 could be?
Well, it had nothing to do with the worship of God or the maintaining of the tabernacle or anything like that.
No.
It had nothing to do with that.
No. Yeah, it didn't.
God commanded the first ones.
Pardon me?
God commanded the first ones to be done.
Yeah, God commanded the others. Did he command this one? No. So there's one of the errors. God did not request a census. All right?
In previous military campaigns, they inquired of the Lord whether they should fight the battles.
Okay.
They're not doing it in their own strength. They're doing it in the strength of the Lord.
Okay. Yes.
By counting the number of men you have, you are starting to rely on your own strength and not God.
Exactly. That's one of them. David was exhibiting the pride of his heart, okay, and putting confidence in the numbers of military-age men rather than in God. Okay. When God commanded a census before, there was one of the main purpose was for the support of the tabernacle, or eventually it would become the support of the temple, okay? So, and that wasn't what was happening here at all, okay? So David was acting in the flesh, okay? Putting trust in man rather than in God. Any others? What had God's promise been to Abraham concerning the size of the nation? Pardon me?
Sand of the sea.
Right. You ever tried counting sand? But the thing was, okay, God had promised to Abraham that he would make the nation innumerable, okay? And so David was not trusting in the promise that God had made that there'd be enough people to do whatever needed to be done, okay, in the nation. And so he was countermanding that, okay? And he was putting, again, kind of links with the whole thing of this pride of his heart, okay? I wrote down here, and we've already talked about it, David was using the census to number the men under 20 years of age for army service, which was forbidden in the law, okay? Okay, you don't count the men for military service with that objective, okay? All right? And David was not fulfilling the command, if you take a census, then you have to collect the shekel for the tabernacle. So he was avoiding the spiritual aspect of this completely, all right? So of these things we've just talked about, which one of those seems to be the most plausible explanation for David's actions in taking a census? Pride, okay? Yeah, to see how strong we are, right? Okay, all right. Putting confidence in numbers rather than in God, all right?
I
Yep.
was also thinking about the shekel, because the shekel, there was a purpose in the shekel,
Yes,
and it had to do with, the first was always consecrated to the Lord.
yes,
And so if they weren't being consecrated to the Lord, then the shekel had to be paid.
yes,
And it's the same principle as in how many years they were in captivity.
mm-hmm,
The years that they didn't have their fields go fallow.
okay, yeah,
Trust in the Lord. It's bottom line is to not trust in the Lord.
yes, exactly. Shows a lack of trust, okay? It's interesting, though, when you read this, there's no explanation actually given. It's all in our minds, okay, but it's not too hard to figure it out, all right? What does Job intimate in verse 3 by his question? Going back to 2 Samuel 24, Joab's question. What was he intimating?
But he didn't see the value in it.
No.
For him, it was an absolute waste of time.
Yeah. Does he see it even as wrong?
Well, he's questioning it, but God is David's God, not Joab's God. He says, "You're God."
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
interesting that,
Yeah. May the Lord your God, okay. I was thinking on this line too, okay. When he says, he talks about, may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times as many as, kind of refers back to Abraham, doesn't it? Thinking that God will provide as many people as we need, okay? So I think Joab, for his good and bad points in this one, I think he hit the nail on the head, okay? That you shouldn't be doing this. I'm not sure how much of all of the law he understood, it doesn't say, but he realizes that at least David's motivation here, he's caught the motivation, hasn't he? Okay, because he talks about the number, which tells you right away that he knows he's going out to count men of military age. All right? And I think he understood that David's motivation was pride. Okay? And he wasn't interested in glorifying the Lord through this, rather than being sure that the nation was well defended. Okay. Who else also discouraged David from taking the census?
All of the commanders.
All of the commanders. It's one thing in our lives, people, when one person comes to us and counsels us and says, but when a whole bunch of people come and say the same thing, it should give you pause. Okay? It should, am I really doing the wrong thing? So what does David do about it?
he pushes forward.
He still goes forward. He completely ignores them. Okay? And so they go out and do it. All right. Okay, so how could David have rationalized his decision?
I'm king.
Okay, and because I'm king,
I can do whatever I want.
I can do whatever I want. Okay, all right. He does have that power. You know, these guys didn't rebel. They did concede to him, though they cautioned him. Okay? Some other things that might have been in David's mind, how he rationalized this decision that he made.
Well, earlier you read a passage, and I don't remember where it is now, but like Satan was influencing David's mind.
Okay,
God allowed him to do that. It doesn't say the same as it was with Job.
right,
But Satan's involved here.
okay,
But where was the passage? Because you read it since I've been here, so I
okay,
don't remember which one it was.
okay, I'd have to think back here. It was,
Because it talked.
oh, they're very, First Chronicles? First Chronicles 21:1. Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number
Yeah,
Israel.
Moved David.
Tempted? Yeah, I think, and to me at least, I would, in thinking of Job, because Job's was a little different.
Yes.
But he was allowed to attack him, okay? This time it's temptation, okay? Okay. Let me give you some other questions here that kind of help to answer this, okay? Who's going to be king after David? Okay. And what do we know about Solomon at this time in David's, like David is now in his last years, so he's, say, probably mid to late 60s, somewhere in there, okay? And what was Solomon? He might be 35, 40, something like that, okay, at this time. What is his experience as far as warfare is concerned? None. No experience whatsoever. In fact, Solomon says about himself that he lacks experience, and we'll get to that when we get to the beginning of his reign. And that's part of the reason why he asks God for wisdom, because he becomes king, but I'm not sure what to do, okay? All right? And so David knew that Solomon was a man of peace. He had no military experience. And so on that basis, what does David want to give him? A large army, okay? That's well organized, it's in place. If you need it, they're there for you, okay? So he's thinking about that, perhaps, okay? That Israel would have the forces needed to protect the land and its people. Okay. What would a large army also guarantee to Israel? Pardon me? Excuse me.
Nobody's going to attack them because that big an army would be kind of crazy to do.
Great. By having a large army, okay, you have a deterrent, right? Those who are thinking about attacking you, might stop and think about that for a bit before they do that, okay? All right. And why would, when David dies, why would the other nations that have been subjected or defeated around now decide that they should attack?
David's reputation kind of spoke for itself, but Solomon doesn't have one.
Right. Solomon doesn't have any experience. Do you think maybe they would know that too? He's been raised in the court, okay? He's had pretty cushy life, okay? He's never had to fight any battles, okay? And so those nations around because okay, these different kings and princes and stuff have come to Israel. They've been in David's presence, okay? They've come to pay what's due by way of taxes and things that are required of them, okay, because they've been subjected. Perhaps they have observed Solomon, okay, in the court. You know, when you're a leader of a nation, you're always appraising the leaders of other nations, okay, and wondering what they're going to do next, okay. And so these guys coming to the court would see Solomon, and they'd wonder, I wonder, is he going to be is he going to be a lion like David, or is he going to be a pussycat? Okay, and so they've been appraising him, and so they might want to take advantage of a new and inexperienced king. All right, if they don't do a full-out attack, they might do little skirmishes. The Philistines were good at that kind of thing. Okay. Well, we'll just go in there and attack this little village and see what happens, if they retaliate or not. You know, you just don't know what might happen. Okay. I'm thinking, too, just from a political standpoint, David may have wanted to organize the army, the government, the priests, the Levites, so that Solomon could have an easy transition as a king. Okay. So you put all the ducks in a row so that he can come into power without any waves, so to speak. Okay? Okay. What was the one big thing that David was going to give Solomon to do? Go ahead, Diane. To build the temple. And so by putting everything in order and keeping it all well organized, just to hand it to Solomon, then Solomon could proceed with building the temple and not be distracted by other things that would take him away from that objective. David had wanted to build the temple, and he was told no by the Lord, okay? And so as we're going to be going into 1 Chronicles here, we're going to be talking about what David was doing to prepare everything for Solomon to have to build the temple. Okay, so I wrote on the next page, whatever the reasons, the Lord was displeased with this census. Okay, back to 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 7, says, God was displeased with this thing, so he struck Israel. Okay? But anyways, God still permitted Joab and his captains to spend the next 9 months and 20 days counting the Israelites 20 years of age and older who were fit for military service. They did not count the Levites who were exempted from military service. That's mentioned in Numbers 149 and 233. Okay? The Levites were exempted from military service. And the men of Benjamin. 1 Chronicles 21, verse 6. The tabernacle was located at Gibeon in Benjamin, as mentioned in 1 Chronicles 16:39-40 and 21:29. And Joab may have thought it unwise to go into holy territory on a mission he considered sinful. Okay, so he doesn't go into Benjamin. Okay? Also, Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and there may still have been pockets of resistance in the tribe. So you don't want to be raising the ugly head of another civil war. Okay? All right. Why would the Lord be displeased with David's possible rationalizations that we already talked about? Any thoughts? We talked about David's reasons, possible reasons for doing this.
He didn't,
Pardon me?
he didn't
Okay, yeah. He didn't ask the Lord what he should do, okay? Trusted in himself. It shows a lack of his trust in the Lord, doesn't it? What would he need to be trusting the Lord for? If he had decided, okay, I'm going to take your counsel, Joab and commanders, and I'm not going to do a census, how would he be showing his trust in the Lord? What would he be trusting him for?
The fact that his commanders said to him, don't do it, you would think might have been enough to take his attention away from what he was going to do and put it back on the Lord and ask.
Okay,
Or at
that's
least
true.
seek counsel.
Okay. Why did we say he was doing this census? What was he trying to discover?
How strong he was.
How strong a military he had, right? So if he didn't do the census, he would have to trust the Lord for the nation's protection, not knowing how many in the army he actually had. Okay? He'd have to trust the Lord to protect Israel. And then we were just talking about thinking ahead to Solomon. He'd have to trust the Lord that God would direct Solomon like he's directed him. Okay? That he could trust Solomon to God. He doesn't have to put everything in order for Solomon so that life will be easy, okay, like he's enjoyed thus far. Okay. Let's go back into chapter 24 and let's look at verses 10 to 14. Okay, it says here, now David's heart troubled him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done, but now, O Lord, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly. When David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and speak to David. Thus the Lord says, I am offering you 3 things. Choose for yourself one of them, which what I will do to you. So Gad came to David and told him and said to him, Shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you? You'd be well familiar with that. Okay? Or shall there be 3 days pestilence in your land? Now consider and see what answer I shall return to him who sent me. Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let us now fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, but do not let me fall into the hand of men. And then let's go back over to 1 Chronicles 21, verses 7 to 13. God was displeased with this thing, so he struck Israel. David said to God, I have sinned greatly in that I have done this thing, but now please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. The Lord spoke to Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and speak to David, saying, Thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose for yourselves one of them, which I will do to you. So Gad came to David and said to him, Thus says the Lord, take for yourself either 3 years of famine, or 3 months to be swept away before your foes, while the sword of your enemies overtakes you. A little different wording here this time. Or else 3 days of the sword of the Lord, even pestilence in the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying through all the territory of Israel. Let's see, is that as far as I went? No, we'll go down to verse 13. Now therefore consider what answer I shall return to him who sent me. David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Please let me fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are very great, but do not let me fall into the hand of men. Okay. So what does David realize after he receives Joab's report? He says 2 things about himself.
I've acted foolishly.
I acted foolishly and
Sinned.
he sinned. It says both those things. Okay? All right. So what does David do about his sin? He confesses it, right? and asks for forgiveness. Okay? Which has been, when you think of David's life, this has been consistent through his life. Okay? And God has been merciful to him because he's had that tender heart where when he's confronted, he confesses. Okay. What's the difference between David's sin with Bathsheba and this one?
With Bathsheba, he did not repent until the prophet came and told him.
Okay.
This one here, he's repented before the prophet came
Is he?
to see him. But it says I've sinned greatly.
Oh, I see. Gad comes with the consequences.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So he's repented before he hears the consequences.
Okay. How long did David have to repent before he did?
Well, at least 9 months.
9 months and 20 days. God gave him adequate opportunity. Let's put it that way. Okay. Okay. There's still a difference I'm looking for here. What motivated David's sin with Bathsheba? Lust. It was the lust of the flesh, right? What motivated the senses? Pardon me? Pride of life. A little different, okay? Yeah, okay. And it was a willful act of rebellion, okay? Because he knew he wasn't supposed to do it. He knew that from the law, okay? And he was motivated by pride. And what does Proverbs 6:16 and 7 tell us about pride?
I was guessing he goes before a fall.
Pardon me?
He goes before a fall.
Uh-huh. And it's the one thing that, it's the highest on God's list of things he hates. Pride. Okay? I mean, that was the whole thing about Satan, wasn't it? His pride led him to rebel. Okay. Both Scripture and civil law make a distinction between sudden sins of passion and willful sins of rebellion. The guilty parties are dealt with differently. So let's look at that for a minute. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 19. Deuteronomy 19, verses 1 to 6. It says, "When the Lord your God cuts off the nations whose land the Lord your God gives you, and you dispossess them and settle in their cities and in their houses, you shall set aside 3 cities for yourself in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God gives you to possess. You shall prepare the roads for yourself and divide into 3 parts the territory of your land, which the Lord your God will give you as a possession, so that any manslayer may flee there. Now this is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live when he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously, as when a man goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies. He may flee to one of these cities and live. Otherwise the avenger of blood might pursue the manslayer in the heat of his anger and overtake him, because the way is long, and take his life, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated him previously." Okay, so here we have unintentional. Okay? All right. And then in Exodus chapter 21, verses 12 to 14, says, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he does not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. If, however, a man acts presumptuously toward his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar, that he may die. He who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death." Okay, anyways. So here we have the thing, the guilty parties are dealt with differently. You have the unintentional and you have the intentional, okay? All right. So, could David have decided to do the right thing prior to confessing now that he's received the military report? It was only when he receives the report that he finally confesses. We already talked about the fact, yes, he had had 9 months. He had had lots of time to think about this while it was going on, all right? There are still consequences for sin even after confession and forgiveness. In his grace, God gives David the privilege, that's an interesting way of saying, I think, huh? The privilege of choosing the consequences, allowing him to make another choice. So what were the 3 choices of discipline that God was going to bring on David and the nation? Okay, 7 years of famine.
For 3 months of invading armies.
Okay, of fleeing from your enemies. Okay, you'd sure remember his days running from Saul, wouldn't he? And from Absalom. Okay, and the third?
3 days of plague.
3 days, 3 days of plague. So which sounds the worst in your
Well, from a human point of view, the 3 days sounds better, but you have the Almighty God in charge of that. I'm not sure that.
When you're talking about God, I mean, in 3 days, God could wipe out the whole nation. Okay? It wouldn't take him 7 years of famine to do it. Okay? And it's interesting, the 3 punishments are named in God's covenant with Israel. If you read Deuteronomy 28, these 3 types of discipline are mentioned there in Deuteronomy 28. Maybe we should look at some of these verses. Okay, let's go over to Deuteronomy 28. Verses 23 and 24. Okay, it says here, the heaven which is over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under you iron. The Lord will make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. So that's one of the things for disobedience. And then over in 38 to 40, you shall bring out much seed to the field, but you will gather in little, for the locust will consume it. You shall plant and cultivate vineyards, but you will neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worm will devour them. You shall have olive trees throughout your territory, but you will not anoint yourself with the oil, for your olives will drop off. Okay? So that kind of explains a little bit about what a famine would be like. Then he mentions military defeat. Let's look at verses 25 to 28. Let's see here. The Lord shall cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will go out one way against them, but you will flee 7 ways before them, and you will be an example of terror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses will be food to all the birds of the sky and to the beasts of the earth, and there will be no one to frighten them away. Okay, and then over in verses 41 to 48. You shall have sons and daughters, but they will not be yours, for they will go into captivity. The cricket shall possess all your trees and the produce of your ground. The alien who is among you shall rise above you higher and higher, but you will go down lower and lower. He shall send to you, but you will not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you will be the tail. So all these curses shall come on you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you would not obey the Lord your God by keeping his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. They shall become a sign and a wonder on you for your descendants forever. And then pestilence. Again, in that same chapter, verses 21 and 22, says, The Lord will make the pestilence cling to you until he has consumed you from the land where you are entering to possess it. The Lord will smite you with consumption and with fever and with inflammation and with fiery heat and with the sword and with the blight and mildew, and they will pursue you until you perish. And 27 and 28, the Lord will smite you with the boils of Egypt and with tumors and with the scab and with the itch from which you cannot be healed. The Lord will smite you with madness and with blindness and with bewilderment of heat. 35. The Lord will strike you on the knees and legs with sore boils from which you cannot be healed from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. And verses 60 and 61. He will bring back on you all the diseases of Egypt of which you were afraid, and they will cling to you, and every sickness and every plague which not written in the book of the law, the Lord will bring on you until you are destroyed. Perhaps David was thinking of these things when Gad mentioned choose. Which one do you want? So what was David's decision?
Short-term pain.
Okay. What does he say to Gad? The language maybe would confuse us, but what does he say to Gad? What's he really saying?
He'd rather fall into God's hands because he knew he was merciful.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to let God choose. Okay? Finally, a wise decision. Though not a pleasant one. Okay? But, yeah, he realizes, I think now he's taking the very humble position. You know, he's done something that he should not have done. And now it's kind of like, I should have let God decide whether we have a census or not. So on that basis, we'll let God choose the discipline as well. Okay? All right. So looking at chapter 24, 2 Samuel, starting in verse 15 to 17, let's read those. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and 70,000 men of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, "It is enough. Now relax your hand." And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking down the people and said, "Behold, it is I who have sinned, and it is I who have done wrong. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house." I wrote here, after God's visit by Gad, David fell before the Lord and cried out for mercy. The Lord sends the 3-day plague, killing 70,000 men, probably from the military census. Okay? But he stops outside Jerusalem, a demonstration of his mercy. God allowed David to see the judgment angel hovering over Jerusalem, which prompts David to ask for judgment on himself and his family rather than the people. The elders of Israel were with David and fell to the ground in contrition and worship. Perhaps they realized that the nation had also sinned and deserved God's discipline. It's important to note that in 24:1, okay, did you catch this before? It says God was angry with Israel. It doesn't say he was angry with David. He was angry with Israel and not with David, so he must be punishing them for some sin they had committed, though it's not mentioned what that is. Okay? It wasn't just David, okay? This whole thing involved the nation as well. It was a discipline on the nation as well as David. All right? The threshing floor belonging to Araunah or Ornan is a Jebusite. Just some historical information. The Jebusites were the original inhabitants of Jerusalem. Okay, so Ornan obviously had submitted to David's rule and was a reputable citizen. Going on now, let's look at these last verses here. Verses 18 to 25. So Gad came to David that day and said to him, "Go up, erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." David went up according to the word of Gad, just as the Lord had commanded. Araunah looked down and saw the king and his servants crossing over toward him. And Araunah went out and bowed his face to the ground before the king. Then Araunah said, "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" And David said, "To buy the threshing floor from you, in order to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be held back from the people." Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take and offer up what is good in his sight. Look, the oxen for the burnt offering, the threshing sledges, and the yokes of the oxen for the wood. Everything, O king, Araunah gives to the king. And Araunah said to the king, "May the Lord your God accept you." However, the king said to Araunah, "No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price. For I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Thus the Lord was moved by prayer for the land, and the plague was held back from Israel. Why didn't David accept the offer of Ornan's threshing floor? He was going to give it to him as a gift, okay? But rather purchased it and the oxen for sacrifice, because Araunah was going to give him the oxen for the sacrifice as well, okay? Why didn't he accept this? He says it himself.
He didn't want to give God something that didn't cost him anything.
Right. He wasn't about to offer sacrifices if it didn't cost him anything. Okay, I wrote here, the land that David purchased was no ordinary piece of property. It was the place where Abraham had put Isaac on the altar, as mentioned in Genesis 22. So we get a lot of significance here. And where Solomon would build the temple. And that's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 22, verse 1, and 2 Chronicles 3:1. Abraham took Isaac to the land of Moriah and called the place of sacrifice, "The Lord will provide." Genesis 22:14. After the plague had stopped, David consecrated the site to the Lord, Leviticus 27, 20, 21, and used it as a place of sacrifice and worship. Even though the altar and tabernacle were at Gibeon, David was permitted to worship in Jerusalem. The land was sanctified and would one day be the site of God's temple. Okay, so we have a very broad panorama of history here. The importance of this particular site starts with Abraham and culminates with Solomon's temple, okay, which we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. Okay, I wanted to go back in our last minutes here, this whole thing of the giving of the shekel. And remember, it said in those verses we read that the Levites were exempt from this. Okay, we'll look at a couple verses here in a minute. In Israel's culture, what was the responsibility of the firstborn son, do you think? It comes. You see that with Israel, with Jacob, Israel, okay, and you remember the whole thing with Joseph, okay? Thinking about Joseph for a second, he received the coat of many colors, okay? This very special coat. Who was that coat designated for? it would normally go to the firstborn son. Joseph wasn't the firstborn. No, he was the 11th of 12. Okay? But he was the firstborn of Rachel. Okay? And he was Jacob's favorite. That's part of the reason why his brothers hated him so vehemently, is because he had been singled out as the firstborn. But the firstborn has special responsibilities. He was given special authority, okay, and honor in the household. He's the one who would sit with his father at the head of the table, okay. Also, he would manage the family's inheritance. Traditionally, that's what would happen. The firstborn was responsible for dividing up the inheritance when father died, okay. So you get a kind of an idea of, in Joseph's brothers' minds, what they're thinking here, like, how dare you? Okay? Where do we have, when we think about the firstborn, is there anything that comes to mind, particularly in relationship to the firstborn? Okay, I'm going to give you, pardon me? Go ahead, Jayan.
Pharaoh's time.
Pharaoh's time, right? What happened to the firstborn? God took every one of them, okay? All right. And so when we're talking about the firstborn, or when we're talking about this shekel and the payment of the shekel to the sanctuary, okay, the Levites were taken by God as the firstborn, okay? They became his special tribe to serve him specifically, okay, instead of the other tribes. And this was as a symbol to Israel of him redeeming Israel from Egypt, okay? So he took the firstborn of all of Egypt, and he takes the firstborn, the Levites, okay? So this was, in their minds, is a correlation, okay? Instead of dying, you get to be the servants instead, okay? Egypt refused to serve God, and they paid the price with death. The Levites were taken by God to serve, okay? All right. In fact, that was what they wanted to do initially. Remember, Israel came and they wanted to go out into the desert for 3 days to worship God, okay? With the intent, of course, of just keep right on going. All right? But that's what they said. Okay. So let's go over to Exodus 13 for a minute. Okay, it says here, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both of men and beast. It belongs to me. Okay, the firstborn. Okay, and then going down to verse 11. Now when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanite, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and gives it to you, you shall devote to the Lord the first offspring of every womb, and the first offspring of every beast that you own. The males belong to the Lord. But every first offspring of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. But if you do not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? Then you shall say to him, with a powerful hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, from the house of slavery. It came about when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord the males, the first offspring of every womb, but every firstborn of my sons I will redeem. Okay. tradition says that, okay, remember there was the counting of the, how many Levites there were, and there was a difference between the number of males from the rest of the tribes and the Levites, okay? A difference of 273 in excess, okay? And tradition says that all the names of the firstborn were written down and put into like a pot, and then 273 names were pulled out of that, because how do you decide who's going to pay this tithe, in a sense, to the sanctuary? And there were 273 names were drawn, and the ransom for that was 5 shekels, okay? Not just the 1 shekel, now it's the 5 shekels, and it went to the sanctuary for the maintenance of the sanctuary, which I thought was really interesting, that there had to be this redemption on both sides. God took the Levites, and then there was this extra 273, and they had to pay that 1,375 it came out to, that we read about earlier in this study tonight. And so it had to do with the redemption of the worship of God, okay? Thought you might be interested in that additional piece of information. Okay, well, we're 2 minutes early. How about that? But anyways, next week we're actually going to go into 1 Chronicles. Okay, you'd say, well, logically we should be going into 1 Kings. That's next. Not quite. Let's just read the kind of my introduction here. I said we've already dealt with some portions of 1 Chronicles during our study of 2 Samuel, particularly in chapters 10 to 21. Before closing out David's life, it's appropriate to deal with God's instructions to David concerning the building of the temple, 1 Chronicles 22 to 29. Okay, that's what we're going to be looking at. And then proceed with David's final days in 1 Kings 1 and 2. Okay, so that's kind of your introduction to next week. That's where we're going and why. Okay? All right. Thank you, folks.